a while back, this was last year during prep. I was having a good time prepping, and it hit me. I think I did it. It was a poster during an airplane ride, and I'm like, man, I'm having a good time. And I'm like, at some point, I'm going to miss all this and the feelings and the excitement. And I guess it made me think that like everything isn't forever, and that at some point, like competing in bodybuilding, or at least competing from the same perspective that I compete in bodybuilding now, well, that's either going to stop or change. And then it got me thinking, because, one of the ways that I age myself is like how many athletes in like, a lot of our major sports are still doing it, that were around like my time. And like when Tom Brady retired, I'm like, oh man, that's crazy, because I think I was coming out of high school when he started. Like he got drafted the following year. And then like LeBron for me was like a year after that. So I'm like, man, they're all disappearing. Like they're all, slowly. There's not a whole lot of people in most major sports that are like in their late 30s. So obviously timeline's a little bit different for bodybuilding, especially natural bodybuilding. But nevertheless, at some point, it's like, man, that might be the last time like you feel that cold stage on your feet as you walk up there. And made me appreciate everything that's going on right now a lot more. But at the same time, yeah, there was a little sadness in that like, man, at some point it's going to end. And for most athletes, it's not the picture perfect ending. Have you guys thought about this?
I remember when I was 38 and I met you, Berto. I remember that conversation. You probably remember this. And I said, man, I'm getting old, man. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to do this. It's probably going to start going downhill because I'm going to be hitting 40. And you're like, what are you talking about? You got like 20 years ahead of you. And he's like, you can improve. And I was like, okay. Like, it made me think. Like, it took me a while to kind of get what you were saying. But as I started to get into my 40s, I realized like, oh, there is some shelf life left here, because I was making some improvements. And it's interesting how you talked about the different perspectives, because when I was in my 20s, I never really thought about ever having to like stop, because I never thought that far ahead. And then when I got into my 30s, it was kind of the same thing. I wasn't really thinking about that until I was getting into my late 30s. And the only reason I think I was thinking like I had to quit was because the number 40, like it was like a fear of like, okay, testosterone levels are going to start tanking and my body's going to start dwindling away. But as you kind of continue on, I kind of realized like, okay, that's not happening. So I kind of just took what you said to heart. I'm like, okay, let's basically enjoy the 40s here and make the most of it. And it was probably the best years that I've had. And now that I'm, in my 50s, it's almost like I'm kind of noticing Father Time catching up a little bit. And it's been a little bit of a challenge trying to have that same mindset that you instilled in me in my late 30s, because now what I saw in my 40s was like, okay, it was true what you were saying, but now Father Time is like saying otherwise. So it's hard to keep the same mentality towards wanting to keep doing it, because it's hard for me to like regress in a way. Like, it's almost like, what's the point of doing this if I'm not going to continue to better myself? So, someone like Tom Brady, I mean, he kind of same thing. He thrived for so long. Then at the tail end, it's inevitable. You just start to lose your skill set. So it's just the question now for me is like, how much longer and what's the why? And that's something that I've been struggling with as of late, is kind of figuring out what is my why? What's that fuel source? Because the fuel source has changed throughout the years. So in my 20s, it was, okay, I want to try to win shows, get a pro card, get notoriety, establish myself, establish a name. And then got into my late 30s, early 40s. It was more about, okay, now I'm trying to help others through the process. So it became a little more selfless at that point. And I was really motivated, because we're obviously starting 3D Muscle Journey. I want to try to help people and pay it forward. And not even that for me now, it's like I've done so much helping. It's almost like the fuel tank for that's kind of running a little bit low. So I'm not exactly sure like where to find what gas is there going to be now or tomorrow. So that's just questions that are kind of like unanswered for me right now. But that's kind of my perspectives as of now, and I'm sure we can continue talking about this stuff. But I might even find more answers when we're done talking with this podcast. And I'm sure a lot of us could, like people out there that can relate to me that are getting more towards the end, or even maybe 5 years into it, that might get a little bit burned out. Because I know for me, like in my 20s, it was go, go, go for 3 years. I got burned out. And my ex-wife, I'd tell her, I'm retiring because I just burned out. I was just retiring. She's like, oh, okay. So I said that I don't know how many times. So it's almost like I was crying wolf every time. But I think now it's like I'm getting to a point where my perspective now, like 37 years, doing this, is like, okay, it's a little bit more wise and mature than it was in my 20s when I was like just burning myself out. Like me talking right now, I'm burned out. I need coffee to kind of pick me back up.
When we were discussing kind of the topic for this podcast, I think none of us really know the answer specifically as to when like is the right time to hang it up and when you feel okay with that. And as Berto mentioned, like I don't know, and maybe this was off camera, but most athletes, it's like usually they go out like usually they're kind of forced into retirement for some reason, or they're declining in their ability, and they kind of just realize it's time. But that being said, like with bodybuilding, I mean, you still see a lot of people up there who are probably not like they're the best versions of themselves at that point in time, which I think is amazing, but that are, probably past their prime bodybuilding years. And it's always interested me and kind of what that, fuel source is, like you said, Jeff. And I think for most of us, like the perspective of why we're competing, is it evolves over time. And, whether it be chasing a pro card or just, all of that's a byproduct essentially of just exhausting your own potential at any given point in time. But like after you've reached that peak, which you never know when you're at that, like what, if you have the desire to continue competing, then where is that desire coming from? And I think that's a hard question to answer. And I think a lot of it is, the camaraderie within the sport, I would imagine. I mean, you look at a guy like Marshall, and he's been competing. When did do you know when he started competing, either of you?
He had a stint before like 2012 when he came back.
Yeah, so he came.
This was like a decade before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I've talked to Berto about this before, but I remember the first time I met him, I think the only time I've met him was at the 2012 Yorton Cup. And it was, in my opinion, like the most impressive physique up there. Just absolutely peeled, just presentation. Everything was very polished. Like he was a pro of pros. And I remember, I mean, he was 52 years old at that point. And that was probably like, now he's, he's still kicking it, like he's still competing. And I think it would be interesting to hear like what his fuel is, at this point, because he probably is, past his prime as a natural bodybuilder. But I think he's certainly inspiring a lot of people along the way, and that could be his why. So I guess like as long as you have a why, wherever you're at in life, then that's really all you need. And if you don't, like there's like quitting lifting and quitting bodybuilding are two different things. I think most people listening to this podcast will probably be lifting for, the rest of their lives, or the majority, so, but competing's a different animal. There's time and a place for competing, and, you need to be not only motivated, but have that why that sustains you when motivation isn't there. it's like I said, I don't have the answer as to when, people can, the definitive like flow chart of when to call it quits. But I think it's something I'm really excited to kind of go through in a way, that process. I know I'm not there yet, but there's a reason there's a lot of, masters competitors and bodybuilding and powerlifting that are still having the time of their lives doing it.
That why, Brian, it's like that's something that was frustrating me about a month ago. Like I think I was feeling like I needed to have a specific why. Because in the past, it's like, okay, I wanted to get a pro card. And I mean, that's a strong fuel source. I was super motivated. That's all I needed. It was like, okay, I'm going to win this show. And it was just go, go, go. And then in 2009, I was like, I just want to have fun this time around. It's all about fun. So it was like a strong why there. So it was always like this strong why, like every time I prepped, where this time I just didn't have like one strong why. And it was bugging me. Like I felt like I didn't have passion, and it was kind of demotivating me and getting me a little bit like depressed with competitive bodybuilding. Not depressed as a person, but just depressed as far as competitive bodybuilding. And I kind of realized after starting to ride my bike out along the levee, basically out to the middle of nowhere, where I would just sit there after I pedaled out there for about 10 or 15 minutes, and just in that peacefulness and that calm, I started to gain a lot more clarity. I'm like, why do I have to have a strong why? Because I noticed there's whys weekly, there's whys daily, and there's even whys within the day. Like I can use just motive, like my son's watching me do something. It could be like me eating a meal, like, okay, I'm eating this certain foods, and he's kind of seeing that. So it's like, okay, I'm basically modeling what I'm doing on a daily basis for him. Like that's a why. There are some days where I'm like, shit, Berto just crushed it at last season, so I want to try to match that. Like I still have that competitive fire. And there's other days where it could be something completely different. And what I'm realizing is that I'm letting my mind drift to the future and to the past a lot. Because when you go through 30 years of competition, that's basically where I'm at now. You do look at what you did in the past, and you do look at where that peak is, because you have more clarity where your peak is in hindsight. Like you guys kind of know more or less where your best years are from a competitor. You can say like Berto just had his best year, because he's basically, okay, you could compare it to 2017, and obviously he's improved his physique, he's improved placings, so everything's improved. So far that's his peak. That for me, it's pretty set that 2014 was probably my best ever season. So it's hard for me to realize I'm trying to compare myself now to 2014 all the time and trying to beat that. But the thing is I was 43 years of age, and now I'm 52. So to
Today,
think
by the way, it's your birthday.
Today. Yeah.
Birthday.
Thank you. So it's just very hard kind of trying to live up to that standard the older you get. So that's where I was struggling with. I was just constantly looking at the past, trying to compare myself to that. Like we tell our athletes all the time, don't compare yourself to others on Instagram. Well, in my case, don't compare yourself to yourself, Jeff. Just, you got to stay in the present. And even in the future, I'm like, okay, how am I going to look when I get on stage as a 52-year-old? Am I going to be competitive? Am I going to look the part still? So I've had to really just kind of center myself and keep myself in the moment within the process and go, okay, my bike ride, I'm enjoying this. Cold air's hitting my face, quads are burning. I'm feeling present with that. I'm enjoying that. Even with my training, same thing, just stay present. Every meal I'm having, stay present. And it's kind of relieved a lot of the pressures and the insecurities and the anxieties that go with that. And I'm kind of just slowly but surely accepting that whatever I bring now, it's going to be the best version of myself now. And I have to be okay with that. It's learning to be okay with that. And I think as long as I'm doing, like getting up in the morning and I'm still doing it, that must mean there's a little bit of joy there left. So I think for me, I kind of thinking like, okay, the day that I know I probably don't want to do this anymore, like I'm just done, like that's when I'll be done. Because there's other things I've done in my life where it's like, I just don't want to do this no more. So that's kind of like what my last month has looked like on this side of it.
Yeah, that which you mentioned, you know, the staying present. I guess that's I think a skill we hone over time throughout life, and addresses kind of the question I have always kind of thought about. You know, as simple as it sounds, is it's like if you stay just in the moment and you focus on, you know, if like you said, we're not comparing. We encourage athletes not to compare themselves to other athletes on Instagram. And so why would it be any different for ourselves? And I think that's an excellent point. And, you know, I always tell my athletes, it's like the placings will take care of themselves if we just exhaust your potential right now. Like that's all we can do. Like, let's not focus on the placings. Let's focus on showing up as best as we can. And so I think that, I mean, you're right. Like the same thing applies as we age. You know, our expectations have to shift, and like that's the reality. Like we're aging, and so, you know, just optimizing within whatever landscape of life you're in, I think is like that's an exciting journey in and of itself.
I think this podcast was like meant for you, Jeff, because you're the closest one out of the three of us to like seeing what's on the other side of that mountain. You know, like Brian and I, like, you know, like whenever you're, you know, going up like a mountain on a hike or something, it's like you think you're like, oh, okay, we're almost at the top, and then you're not there, and then before you know it, you're there. That like you have to, you know, it's over, and you have to descend downwards. Yeah, you've kind of you started your descent in a way, or at least you're at peace with the possibility of that. And I think Brian and I can, like all athletes, fantasize about how we're going to handle that, but it's different to actually like be there, and you have no choice. It's, you know, like when you quit bodybuilding, like in your, was it like 20s, the early 30s, that's different, you know, because that was more of a mood thing. Whereas like now it's not a mood thing. It's more of like, hey, you have less years in the sport left than, you know, what you've trekked so far. And that's why it came to me like when I was on that plane, because I'm like, man, like all these little things are awesome. Like it's exciting to hop on a plane, to, you know, go across the country, to like all the people you run into, you know, just getting a taste for like this promoter's shows. You know, you've heard about the show, you've never done it. Like all that stuff is so exciting, and it's like, damn, yeah, at some point you ain't gonna be doing this forever. And yeah, part of what also makes it, at least for me, alluring is the fact that, hey, there's a possibility that I can do well, you know, and that's been a newer thing for me. Whereas I think, you know, just 5-10 years ago, I was more of a, you know, blue collar bodybuilder. It's like, you know, I'm gonna go up there and I'm gonna do okay. And now I have like different expectations. So it's like I'm up here, like my trajectory is like, okay, it's not going as fast, but I'm like, okay, so when do we come back down? And you don't know, and that is a little frightening. And again, I'm like we discussed this off air. It's like, okay, so when that time comes, it's like, what are you going to do? I mean, right now I have lofty goals. I want to, keeping in mind that I think every sport has found ways to have athletes like last longer, right? Like if you go back to the 80s, like, you know, like NBA, NFL, like, you know, like, you're approaching 30. It's like, we might have to trade this guy soon here. Well, he's still worth a little something. And, you know, now guys are in their early 30s and just as athletic as they were like coming into the league. And the same thing with like natural bodybuilding. I think it was always kind of there. It's just, I think we compared ourselves too much to the other sports. So I think there'll be a lot more Marshall Johnsons. like in the next few decades. I think Marshall was proof of that. And I Dave Riggs, Marshall Johnson, guys like that, like to me, they serve as inspirations because no one gave them the example. They just legit were like, yeah, and it probably, the perspective was probably very similar to the one you have right now, Jeff, where it's just like, I'm just going to take care of business on a daily basis the way I usually do. And that amounts to something. So, yeah, I guess I want to be a pioneer in that sense. I'll try to be, and that's if my interests are still there, because that's another possibility. It's like, what you value in life changes so much. Yeah, so who knows? Like maybe I might have the capabilities when I'm in my 50s to give it another decade, but I just might not be interested in that anymore. And I think that would be the closest thing to a soft landing for like an athlete to like actually like leave under your own power, and there's athletes in certain sports that have done that, that just like left at the peak of their careers. And with them, like this is the part that troubles me with that perspective. It's like, okay, what if I decide, like forget this bodybuilding thing. I'm just going to live a generally healthy life, lift, go on runs, whatever, do an Ironman, do a marathon, just have these athletic rendezvous, right? It's like, I wonder, like, do they ever stop and think, like, does Barry Sanders ever think like, could I have had like one more 2,000 yard season had I like, so there's that part too that's troubling. It's like, okay, is that going to keep me up at night? Like, could I have, what could have been?
That's part of my why now. Like, I don't want to have no regret. Like, I don't want to just say, you know what, I'm not really feeling this as much as I used to. Let me just stop. Because middle of next year, I don't want to go, oh man, shit. What if I was up on a WNBF Worlds? I might have regrets. So I just want to like make sure, go through one more season, and then just make sure like at the end, okay, I did it. And I understand too, like the why can change. Like my why I can actually learn what my why is or was after the fact. Like 6 months after the season's over, I'm sure I'll have even more clarity on maybe why I actually went through that process again. But yeah, regret is definitely part of the why. Because I don't want to have regrets at the end, like, oh, I should have done that.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez popping in to let you know about the Vault Quick Start Guide. As many of you guys have heard me talk about a bajillion times, the 3DMJ Vault is our online education platform full of video courses to help you become the best lifter, dieter, competitor, and overall athlete, I guess, that you can be. At the time of this podcast release, we have a total of 19 video courses included in the Vault VIP membership, and our 20th one on how to create a training split or microcycle will be released later on this summer. It's so good. Tons of videos, of course, and a spreadsheet that's like customizable and all that jazz. So anyways, coming soon. But as this platform continues to grow and expand over time, we thought it'd be helpful to offer some direction and guidance on how to proceed effectively and efficiently through the material. So that's why we created this new Vault Quick Start Guide. It includes a glossary of terms, a suggested order of course progressions depending on your goals, and approximate time estimates on how long it typically takes an athlete to learn and master each skill set presented. And it's totally free. Just go to 3dmjvault.com, sign up for a free account by entering your email address, and take a look through the chapters to see which learning pathway would be best for you. Whether you're a complete blank slate beginner, a future competitor, a current competitor, or an advanced athlete who wants to take it to that next level, there's a recommended order of tools and video courses provided so you can see what our coaches think would be most meaningful for your continued progress and success. Again, that's 3dmjvault.com to view the entire Vault Quick Start Guide completely free. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast, and we look forward to seeing you in the vault.
I guess another way to think about that is it's like you never really know. It's like you won't have regrets if you know that you reached your peak as a competitor at some point. Like, okay, that was my peak. Whereas I think a lot of people will call it quits before that, or when they perceive it as their peak. Like if you go back to when you and Berto met, and you were in your late 30s, your perception was like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. It's like if you wouldn't have kept competing at that point, like you probably would have seen, these other competitors in their 40s, they're doing really well, and thought, shit, like now, like I have regrets. Maybe I could have done it, And so really the only way you've reached your peak is if you push past it, And I think that's another, if somebody has a competitive season where they do everything right, and they show up and maybe they don't feel like they're as competitive as they were before. Like I think you can, at that point, like you can still absolutely continue competing, and there's a lot of reasons why somebody would maybe want to do that. But if it is time to quit at that point, like at least like you reached your max potential, and I think that's for like Berto and I, like I know, like I think our bests are probably still, hopefully, ahead of us. But I'm sure like it's going to take pushing beyond that to know that like we truly reached that. But yeah, I've always also, with bodybuilding in any sport really, admired athletes that have kind of adapted with the game and, have found ways to, succeed when their physical capabilities maybe are dwindling. And I mean, you look at like Tom Brady, like that's a great example, like he wasn't the best athlete. I mean, he wasn't at his peak form athletically late in his career, but he compensated for that because he was brilliant, at what he did, mentally, and he just knew the game. And I think that's something that excites me. And I think this is true for a lot of, older competitors too, is there's so many facets to this game, the game of bodybuilding, that a lot of people, they think it's just, okay, show up jacked and in shape, and like that's the sport. And, Jeff, one thing I've always admired about you is like the care you've taken into the presentation side of things, because that's an area where a lot of people, like if they could get worse physically and improve their posing and do a lot better, and so I think that's, if there's an area, if you're an individual that's like, okay, I don't really want to compete again unless I'm going to be better, like kind of audit the different categories of skills in this sport and think, is there anything here? Like, have I truly feel like I've exhausted all of these? And if not, like if posing, you still see a lot of masters competitors that don't know how to pose. You still see a lot of people that their preps were maybe, the preps themselves were aggressive and they lost a lot of muscle. And so there's a lot of areas, I think, in this sport specifically that people can refine and do better than they did previously, even if they're physically not as equipped as they were in their 20s and 30s.
It's a fair point.
Actually,
That's a true point, actually.
Marshall, if you look at his pictures, like pre-retirement, like his first stint, he was not nowhere near as lean.
No.
And you could definitely tell that, he had healthier joints then. So he had like, he was more muscular in some ways, but he was not nearly as effective.
Yeah,
and when he came back, he's like, all right, I'm going to do this one thing that, I guess these guys, and he told me himself, like, these guys diet a lot longer now. I'm going to give that a try.
Yeah.
And I mean, when we saw him at the Yorton Cup, I think he had been dieting for like close to 30 weeks at that point.
That did.
And he was, more formidable in his 50s because he figured out like, what is it that I wasn't doing so well back then? And so, I mean, I think about that too. It's like Michael Jordan post his first retirement. Like when he came back, he was like, okay, well, not as athletic and springy. let me learn to, shoot a little better. And that's how we did it. Ali, when Ali knocked down Foreman, that was not prime Ali anymore. He's like, let me come up with some sort of strategy to neutralize this big fella. So yeah, I've thought about that game as well. It's like, okay, maybe at some point I'll have to reinvent myself and find different ways to be successful. I've also thought about, it's another basketball player, JJ Correa. If you look at this dude, he's little dad bod, 5'10". But he did things that you're like, how is like someone's dad on the basketball court doing his thing? So he was really, really effective. Like, he was pretty athletic too, considering the fact that, like he had a belly that stuck out a little bit, and, like he was maybe 5'10". I don't think he was 5'10", to be honest. But at the end of his career, he was just kind of a bench guy that really helped out like the other guys. And so there's that role as well. There's like the spirit animals and teams where it's like, it's a good guy to have around it. And I've considered that too. Like maybe it doesn't go according to plan, and I start to decay a little bit earlier than I thought I would. It's like, okay, could I still be of use to this sport, and help others get the most out of themselves? That's a possibility too. All again, these are all options prior to like saying, okay, I'm done. So there's a lot of routes, and I guess that's what you'll figure out what it is that you're going to do, because you're going to have no choice. Like when Father Time tells you it's okay, it's time to come back down, you have no choice, and I guess we do have options. They're just not nearly as good as like the peak, or maybe they are. Who knows? I'm not there yet, so maybe there's something there.
It is like a different type of challenge because you're working with an older body. So the things that you were doing when you were younger, you can get away with it when you're younger, but not so much now. Like me training now, it's like I have to be very strategic and not push myself too much. And it's just a different type of a challenge. Even mentally, it's a challenge too, because when you do something for 30 years, it's like the passion and the fire just isn't there. You guys think back to your first 5 years doing this. You guys are probably like hungry. Like, I want to get after it. I want to kill it. But now it's like, I'm on this side. I already have developed, considering, I don't want to like toot my own horn, but elite level physique. And I've already been to the highest stage. So when you go through a lot of those experiences, in a way, it's kind of boring for me to keep doing it. It's like repetitive. It's almost like you're seeing the same thing over and over and over. Yeah, you could try to reinvent, but it's almost like you're still doing the same thing. You're getting as lean as you possibly can, holding on to as much muscle. You're putting on opposing trunks, and you're getting up on stage to show people this physique that you're working on, but it just doesn't have the same fire. That's why, like, when I went to my son's karate class last week, it was almost like something totally new. It was like, and I got sore for 3 days. Like I never felt the top of my glutes be that sore in all my life from doing a bunch of side kicks. And I'm like, and it was exhilarating because I'm like, this is a challenge. Like, I'm starting from ground zero. I felt like that kid bodybuilder at 14 moving the plastic weights. Like, it was exciting. So I'm like, okay, I need something like that. So I don't know, like, what the future holds. Like, I don't even know if I'm actually declining yet, because you guys know how it is. You're not going to know until you're all the way leaned down whether you're actually regressing or not. And I can tell my muscle hasn't gone anywhere. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be better, I'm going to be worse, or about the same. So I know there's a lot of answers later on down the road. But for now, it's still a little bit of a struggle, because I know I'm closer to the end than I am the beginning. So I'm just trying to find like what that why is, what that fuel is. It's kind of going all over the place. And I know for certain, like, I wasn't okay with that. Now I am. Like, I'm just letting the days roll and just kind of rolling with whatever the day throws at me. But it's definitely challenging. And I think this is probably, like, I didn't want to do this podcast, to be honest, because I was like, there's no answers for people, but I think just talking through it, I can kind of see the value, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that have probably felt this way. And I guess the thing I could say with confidence is that it's okay if you don't have your answer in the moment, because you just have to go through experiences, and you basically explore and you discover as you go. And what's interesting is, like, 6 months from now, I might do, or wait, 6 months from Worlds now, somewhere in there, I can do Worlds and like have the time of my life and go like, yeah, I'm gonna do this next year. Like, I can see that happening. But I'll kind of just wait and see how I feel at that time comes. Because Brian, I remember last we were watching Berto in the audience, I was sitting there with a fat piece of chocolate cake. I'm like, I'm good. Like, you're like, I don't need to do this no more. I'm happy being here, eating a piece of chocolate cake, watching my brother do something very special up there. I was living through him, and I had athletes there, and I was living through them. I was enjoying coaching them. So I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'm very happy. I'm content. But I think the reason I like going through this process, like, started to back up, was like, I think the initial like why was no regrets. But, you know, you start rolling with it, and then, you know, it gets more challenging, and you're trying to be a dad, you're trying to be a coach, you know, you're trying to be a friend, brother, all this stuff. And it's like, man, there's just so much energy to kind of go around, and it can get exhausting and tiring when you don't have the same type of passion as you once did. It's challenging.
Yeah.
Very challenging mentally, more so than like physically. I feel good, actually. I feel like better than I did when I was the last time I competed in 2019 at 48. Like, I felt like I did pretty good at 48. I was pretty happy with that season, but physically I feel way better now than I did then. And that has a lot to do with the training style, the training approach, just being a little bit more conservative.
Yeah, I think if you look at it kind of as a game of refinement, you know, across a career, I think it like that'll never end. Like, there's never going to be a perfect prep. I mean, there's always something that maybe you can improve on a little bit more. And I think that's another thing. I mean, if your physique, you know, or, you know, someone listening to this, their physique, they feel like is past maybe their competitive prime. It's like, let's see, like there is joy in making things more efficient, I think, with a contest prep. It's like, wow, I was able to do that and not suffer as much as I have in the past. Like, that's a huge win. And that's something that, you know, I can pass along to other people, and, you know, they can observe and implement themselves. But yeah, just that ongoing kind of refinement of your craft, Jeff, is I think it's fun to watch, you know, and it's interesting. Like, I mean, I know you've trained with high volumes, low volumes, but it's like you found a way to like thrive through it. And I think that's awesome. And I think regardless of, you know, where you place, you know, at Worlds, like it's giving back a lot to the community either way. So I don't know. I'm excited to see it. And I don't know the answer. Like you said, like this wasn't originally the podcast that you and I had wanted. Berto kind of talked us into this option, which, I mean, I'm glad we did, because it's good hearing your perspective on it, for sure.
Berto's thinking.
Mm-hmm. Can always tell when Berto's thinking.
What I like about you, Berto, is that you're wiser beyond your years. Because, again, going back to when I was 38, you were wiser than me, but yet you're 12 years younger than me. And so you now, as a 40-year-old, like, you already can kind of see in the future for yourself, like 10, 15, 20 years. So it's always very interesting to hear your perspective, because you're just well-rounded in that regard. So no pressure. I'm curious to see what your next thought is.
It's crazy. I was 26 telling you, talking all this shit. Like, I knew what I was talking about. But
I think at that time, though, it was like your competitive fire, because you were like, you weren't even like, right. I think right now you're probably somewhere at your peak. Well, I don't think it's the end of the peak. I think you're just now coming into it, and you probably have another decade. And like, I can see you 5 years from now, like, just dominating still. And at 26, you weren't even like at your peak. You're, like you said, you're a more blue collar, still kind of learning things, but still well wise beyond your years, even at that point. So it's I think now, like, you just had your best season. What's the fuel for you now moving ahead? Because it's like, what's the fuel for you wanting to get better placings, win more shows? Is it to serve others? Like, what's the main fuel source, or is there a few fuel sources?
See, when I started bodybuilding, I don't think it was for a lot of the reasons that other people do. When I go back, it sounds like more cocky than winning shows. I just wanted a good life. That was it. Like, I think about it and it's like, oh, okay, that's why, for example, like LeBron James' sons aren't going to be as good as LeBron, because like he needed to do that. And for me, it's kind of the same thing. It's like, and it was kind of a risk, but I was like, okay, like I've made a lot of errors in my life up until this point. And I'm like, what's the one thing I can do, man? And I looked at bodybuilding and I'm like, okay, well, you burn quick and it's like, you get done dirty, you know, if you go the untested route. So I was like, nah. And then I saw the tested and I'm like, okay, like it would have sounded like a really shitty plan to most people. Like, really? Like natural bodybuilding? You're gonna like, you know, carve out living and a better life through that. So for me, it was just that, man. I just wanted a better life, and I think that's what drove me to do a lot of things. Was just like it was either this or a shitty life, like realistically, you know. So I got that already, you know, and I'm thankful for that. So a big part of this is I want to help other people get a better life through bodybuilding. And whatever my role is, like that's just what I'm going to play. So, you know, if it's like me decaying and like next time I prep for some reason, because you just never know, right? Okay, well, you know, just I'll contribute however I can, you know, because, you know, I got mines through this sport and I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, you know, at the end, that's what I wanted. They gave it to me. So like from here, it's just like, okay, let me cook up some more pies and then, you know, and give everyone a slice because there's plenty to go around, basically. So yeah. But I want to see this thing through, man, because like my body's been really good to me. So a lot of people like, they'll inquire, you know, once you get into your late 30s, you ever think about going on TRT? And I'm like, I like you, Jeff, like I want to see this thing decay. I want to see this thing all the way through. I want to learn about like how to make this thing effective in this setting and that setting. And to me, that's, you know, that's part of the mastery equation, you know, it's like as things change, it's like you should change and adapt with them. So, yeah, as this thing falls apart, like I want to be there for it and do what I can, and contribute somehow. So I just, yeah, you just have to roll with it, much like how you've been adaptive when it comes to this. Yeah.
That's something I don't like when I'm done competing. Like, I don't have, I guess my mentality, my ego isn't that big to where like I feel like I have to like sustain or this muscle mass, you know. Like I'm 52 and I've kind of realized I'm still doing the same habits that I've always done from the time I was 14 as far as lifting weights. Some of the bad habits as far as eating too much at certain times, that's crept up here and there over the years. So I've seen my body composition change because of bad body fat distribution. But the muscle mass, like from the time I was 14, it accrued over time. Yes, it slowed down and it probably has stopped the last decade. But I've kept the same habits just being in the gym and the muscle hasn't disappeared. So I know it's like, okay, from this point forward, it's not going to all of a sudden just like go downhill. It's not like, okay, I'm retired from competitive bodybuilding. Now I'm going to lose my physique, because I still plan on maintaining the habits because I enjoy this physique. I enjoy lifting weights. I don't want to let that go. So my definition of a bodybuilder, my perspective on that has definitely changed. You know, you don't have to be a competitive bodybuilder to be a bodybuilder. Like you can still lift weights, you can still get in enough protein, you can still eat enough to support all that and still have a nice physique. You don't have to be walking around at 5, 6, 7% body fat to prove you're a bodybuilder. So that's another thing I was struggling with. Like, do I really need to go through this process? Like, what am I trying to prove here? I've already accomplished a lot. So that's, again, I was like another struggle for me. But I'm already, like, I've already thought about, like, when I am just done, like I'm done competing, like I'm still going to maintain what I'm doing from a habit sense. And I'll still train with the intention of trying to improve, even if I'm not. I'm still want to, because I know if I do that, at the very least, I'm going to maintain this physique for quite a while. It's inevitable. Father Time's probably going to catch up. You know, we start getting saggy skin and all that stuff. And so, but yeah, it's just the habits. And I don't want to like use a crutch and say, well, I hopped on this because I'm insecure about losing muscle. Like, let me just see how far I can take it. And because I know it's a reflection. Like, people are watching me, whether it's my family or it's our community. Like, I want people to kind of see, like, okay, this guy did it this way, right or wrong, doesn't matter. It's like, this is how he did it from day one all the way to the end. And, you know, I can say at the end, like, okay, this is where my peak was. This is where this was. This is where that was. Like, because everything I did was like consistent all the way through. And that's something I am proud of, is the longevity aspect. Like, that's something I'm really super proud of. Like, when I remember training, when I started training 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, I made a lot of progress, but I never saw myself at 52 being this jacked. Yeah, like my brain at that point was like, 52 was hella old, you know? There's no way you could look like that at 52. That was my mentality back then. Even in my 20s, I just, like, you see a 50-year-old jacked, you're like, you know, your first thought is like, oh, they're doing something they probably shouldn't be doing. But now that I've gone through it, it's like, well, the habits have been there the entire time, most of the habits anyways. So I'm just going to continue with that until the end. Like, the time I quit, like, official, like, bodybuilding is the day I can't do another rep.
Yeah. I think another thing that most people probably don't think about is, like, you're going to probably live longer because of the muscle mass that you've put on throughout your life. Like, you know, even if you get, 70, 60, 70 years old and things, start to atrophy a little bit, maybe, you've got a reservoir of muscle there to keep you healthy through the years when you need it the most, like the weakness and, falls are like it can be the end of people,
Yeah.
And so, it's not like a super motivating factor to think about, but it's a nice side effect, I think, of sticking with this. And, for as long as, you've got a nice cushion there where a lot of people, like, your quality of life in your 70s and 80s is going to be better because of this.
Like, some people are forced into retirement. I've thought about that because bodybuilding competitively wasn't serving them. And the only thing about that makes me sad is that they sometimes stop lifting altogether. And like you said, Brian, like a lot, and I think if that is what bodybuilding is doing to you. It's like, it's just putting you in a toxic place mentally. It's like, okay, maybe not the best thing for you, but for us, like, it's like a form of self-care, like to go in there and train and eat a certain way. So yeah, regardless, like I saw the Ronnie Coleman documentary all the way through, and like, it's crazy. Like, he's in all sorts of pain, but like he still trains, and he still does, like, he gets excited for like new, like, protein powder flavors, and I'm like, oh damn, like, that's like, it's his anchor. It's like what's holding him together in many ways is his training. So I mean, yeah, competitively, it's like, who knows how long we'll all do it, but like, once you've you've identified this as like, oh, this is something that I do for me. This is something that makes me better and makes me more available and better to the important people in your life. Yeah, it's like I can't see myself like I do fantasize. I'm like, man, that'd be cool if I like died the day after like an intense workout. like 89. And it's like, man, we saw him here. He was doing, drop sets on like the leg extensions and, yeah, like that's what I want, man. Like that is for sure. Like what role bodybuilding competitively has in my life, like in the future, I can't look too far into the future, but like for sure, like the training and like, this is, in a way, it is my culture above anything else. Like this is just how I live. I know no other way of living at this point. Spend more of my life like bodybuilding than like not in some form. So yeah, competitively, it's a nice little extra to like maybe push the most out of yourself, to really learn how to hone in and master like this craft. But like the lifting aspect, like if you're a true meathead, like I think they'd have the same answers I have. Like it's like I'm gonna die the day after I lift, or maybe even later that day. That's just how it is. I can't see myself without pushing myself within the confines of like my situation and that current body. Like that's just no way to live for me.
I don't know if I have anything else to add.
Yeah, I don't really have much else. I'm eager to see this unfold for myself. I shouldn't say eager, but I'm prepared to see this unfold.
Yeah, same. It's going to be interesting. And, like Jeff and Brad, you guys are like the ones that get to give us the preview and like dispense the knowledge downwards.
Lucky us for being the old ones.
But before we know it, me and Brian are going to be in the same position, and we're going to be telling the younger folks, like, hey, be ready for this and that. And yeah, hopefully they listen. Hopefully we listen.
Yeah. One thing I think with Brad that I've always thought was just awesome is how much he loves to train. Like that's the best part of his day, and that's something that, it's contagious. It makes you appreciate what you're able to go in there and do each day. And I think he's always a good reminder. Like anytime I see one of his training videos and his home gym, it's like, it kind of takes me back to why, I started lifting in the first place, which is, just self-improvement and enjoying it. Like we don't grow while we're in the gym, but we still enjoy it, and I think that's something that we can do forever, really. So, but yeah, I don't have anything else to add.
Thanks for listening to the old man issues. And I'm going to try to pull Tom Brady here and see if we can find the end zone one last time.
There you go.
Yeah, we'll go ponder our demise, I guess, right? From the sport now.
We'll all go ponder our demise. We'll leave you with that.
What's going on, everybody? Eric Helms here, Chief Science Officer of 3DMJ. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and let me just take 1 second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I do with Lauren Colenso-Semple, Eric Trexler, as well as Mike Zerdos. These are experts in their field, and we cover all the information relevant to you as an athlete or coach if you're working with strength or physique athletes, or if you're a recreational or competitive athlete yourself. We cover nutrition, training, sports psychology, and health. And we do this in written format, as well as, since you like the podcast, audio summaries, as well as video concept reviews. If you're a trainer, we also have continuing education credits for ACSM, NSCA, NASM, and ACE. So head over to 3dmusclejourney.com, click on the products tab, and you can find us there. I look forward to seeing you, and enjoy the podcast.